Is it not on? Working? You know, in sales, we're going to hear objections. If you don't hear objections, it's not really sales, it's order taking. So I put together 7 tips to help you overcome the objections that you're undoubtedly going to hear if you're in the sales niche, if you're in the sales profession, if you're in the sales world. Okay, now these 7 tips, I'm going to go through one at a time. The first tip I think I need you to understand is you can't believe the customer every time they give you an excuse as to why they're not buying. So tip number 1 would be don't believe the excuse. A lot of times they're throwing out an excuse simply to get out of the situation. They're done talking to you, they don't know how to say no, so they basically make up a reason why they're not taking advantage of your deal or why they can't move forward or whatever the case may be. And most amateur salespeople will believe the first thing that comes out of the customer's mouth. Why? They just built a little bit of rapport, they've had a conversation, they have no reason to think this person is lying. Well, tip number 1 is more than likely they are lying. Tip number 2 is just simply ask why. If you've built a relationship with these individuals and you have the ability to ultimately use candor in your conversation, well then you're more than likely able just to simply ask why. A lot of times salespeople, they won't even ask why the customer is refusing to buy. You have to identify and isolate the objection, which is the 3rd tip. If you want to identify and isolate the objection, it's very simple. Number 1, you ask why they're not moving forward, whatever the reason they are. Now, I've got a couple of objections here that I'm going to cover that more than likely you're going to hear, and I'll use this information during each one of those. But to identify and isolate the objection is really just to make sure you validate that it's the real objection, because you can't really close on an objection that isn't real. If you spend a lot of time trying to make sense of something and it's not even the real reason they're not buying, you're wasting a lot of your time and a lot of the customer's time. So you want to be able to identify and isolate the objection to make sure that it's valid. The 4th tip I want to give you is always agree with your customer. I want to think about it. Hey, it's a big decision. I would think about it too. I need to get my wife. Of course you would want to get your wife. That makes perfect sense to me. I know my wife would want to know if I were making a decision like this as well. Always agree with your customer. That's one of the tips I give people, but they don't always listen to it. Too many times they're out there and they want to argue with their customer, confront their customer, get in awkward situations with their customer. You never want to do that. You always want to remain in a freaking relationship that's symbiotic. You always want to agree with the customer no matter what their objection is. Always agree. Another tip I want to make sure you understand is to use logic. If you're listening intently to your customer and the reason they don't want to move forward, a lot of times logic will tell you what to say next and how to overcome that objection. Because people's objections is really the reason they're not buying, if they're telling the truth. If they're not buying for a particular reason, use your logic to try and figure out a way that would solve that issue. Logic being an acronym: leverage, obvious gain, intelligence, and common sense. Just use common sense. Use your intelligence. Okay, everyone has intelligence. Don't get stuck on stupid and not know what to do when someone says the reason they're not buying and you validated it and made sure that it's an actual objection. Well, then use logic, man. Leverage the obvious gain of doing business with you now. Use intelligence and common sense to figure out what kind of solution you can come up with that might solve that problem. Tip number 6, restate and verify the problem. Restate and verify the objection. Repeat what it is they told you to make sure that you understand what it is they're telling you. Too many times a customer will give an objection, the salesperson wasn't listening, they didn't restate and verify the objection to make sure that that is in fact what the customer said. I always say restate and verify so you can make sure that you have the right information. You don't want to react on information that isn't correct. And sometimes as salespeople, we're listening to respond rather than listen to understand, so we might have misheard the customer. So just restate and verify the objection. You need to get your wife? Is that what you said? So if I'm going to understand this correctly, you just need to get your wife to make this decision? Yes, that's what I said. Makes perfect sense to me, right? You're going to agree with them. That's not the end of it. That's just a little technique and a tip that I'm giving you, because you always want to restate and verify and make sure you got the right information. And the 7th tip is to listen. Too many salespeople run their mouth so much that they don't listen to the information that the customer is giving them. They don't watch the body language. They're not reading the micro expressions. They're not hearing what's not being said because they're listening to respond rather than listen to understand. So the tip I'm going to give you today is listen to your customer, not only during the objection, but during the whole conversation. You need to learn how to become an active listener because customers will tell you everything you need to know to sell them your product or service. So tip number 1, do not believe the objection. Tip number 2, ask them why. Tip number 3, identify and isolate the objection to make sure it's valid before you try and close on it. Always agree with your customer, use logic, restate and verify, and listen. Those are the tips. Now, what are the most common objections you're probably going to hear? In my opinion, I'm just looking is the first one that you're going to hear. And here's the tip on that. Finish the sentence for them. See, customers say I'm just looking, but what they really are saying is I'm just looking for your product or service. I'm just looking for a solution. Too many salespeople hear I'm just looking, so they say, okay, I'll be over here when you're done. Just finish the sentence. That's the tip. Anytime someone says I'm just looking, finish the sentence for them. I'm just looking to buy your car. I'm just looking to buy your house. I'm just looking to buy your service. I'm just looking for a solution. If they were to say that and you finish the sentence for them in your mind, it causes you to react more positively rather than negatively and or with a lack of interest. Number 2, price is too high. Oh boy, I'm sure you're going to hear this one a lot, and the tip there is it's not usually about the price. That means you need to ask better questions so you can build the value of your product and service better than you did. Because if they're objecting over the price 9 times out of 10, it's because you didn't build enough value in your product or service. Price is rarely the actual objection. It's the lack of value that's the objection. When they tell you the price is too high, what they're telling you is they don't value your product or service beyond the value they have of their money. So the tip when someone says the price is too high is to remember that it's not about price, and you need to start asking some questions quickly to figure out how to build the value of your product or service beyond what you have so far. Another one you're going to hear, I have to get my spouse. That one comes up a lot. Remember to always agree, hey, I would get mine as well. It's a big decision. However, the tip is don't always believe it. Don't always believe the fact that they have to get their spouse just because they said they have to get their spouse. You want to learn how to close somebody on an objection because there's steps and techniques. Identify and isolate and then close on logic. Another one you're going to hear, I want to think about it. If you're always agreeing with people and someone says they want to think about it, obviously you would want to say, clearly that's definitely something that you'd want to think about. So always agree is the tip there. Even though I've already covered that tip in another section of this video, I want to stress that you always want to agree with your customer. You never want to be in a situation where you're adversarial with the individual that you're talking to. You're probably also going to hear, I need to shop around. If they need to shop around, it's because that you haven't sold them your product or service. You haven't given them enough information to do their homework or convince them or give them the confidence. The tip I would give you there is to become an expert, not only on your product or service, but on your competition. When they need to shop around, why would they need to go shop around if you've got all that information handy? You're excellent at what you do. You're not an amateur. You went and studied not only your product and service, but the customer's product and service. So technically, you position yourself as an expert and you save them a lot of time going around and shopping other products and services because you've got the expertise of all of the products and services, not just your own. And you're willing to pull out your iPhone and pull up some information for them. If you established a good relationship and you've built a friend, basically, and a little bit of trust, you can probably get them to do the shopping with you. Now, again, it's not always going to be the case, but in most cases, when someone wants to shop around, it's because you simply didn't give them enough information about your product or service. Or if they want to shop around, it's because they need more information from other products. So if you studied other products, other services, your competition, and became very versed at what they offer and what they do and what the difference is and what their pricing model is, you're now positioning yourself as an expert. So that's the tip. Position yourself as an expert, pull out the phone and offer them information before they take off. Another one you're going to hear, it's not the right time. Well, guess what? If you're mastering one of the tips I gave you to identify and isolate the objection, you would ask why? Why isn't it the right time? What's the reason you believe this isn't the right time? Because the best time to do this was yesterday and the second best time is now. So find out why they want to leave. Just ask why. It's not the right time. You know, makes perfect sense, but out of curiosity, why is it not the right time? What is it that you're waiting on? You might also hear, it's the wrong color or doesn't fit their needs perfectly. You know, something's not right, if you will. Again, if you want to learn how to overcome objections, you want to identify and isolate the objection by saying why. So if something's not right with the product or service or, you know, situation, you want to find out what is not right, because something is not right is not necessarily an objection with clarity. It's just a vague objection. So what's not right? Find out why. And again, if you built the relationship properly, you'll have the right to do this. You'll have earned the right to have an open conversation. If you have ethics and integrity and confidence in your product or service, and you've positioned yourself as an expert, a lot of times people won't be offended when you ask a simple question like, well, why? You know, why is this not the right time? And then you use logic to figure out why it is the right time, you know, some sort of sense of urgency. So get clarity is the tip on that one. Make sure that you get clarity and figure out exactly, specifically what's stopping that individual from making a decision, which is identifying and isolating the objection. Once you identify and isolate the objection, you simply come up with a hypothetical solution. So a hypothetical solution is powerful because you can pretty much solve any problem hypothetically. So if the hypothetical solution to the problem doesn't solve it, it doesn't cause them to say yes, then you can rest assured that that's not the only reason they're not buying, or it's not the reason at all and they've put up a false objection. And you cannot close on an objection that isn't real. Okay, so there you go. 7 tips on how to overcome objections that you're undoubtedly going to hear if you're interested in becoming a master closer, a master salesperson, and make 6, 7, 8 figures in this business. Then do yourself a favor and go check out the rest of my videos.